Have you ever noticed how some people can pick up the phone without a second thought? A call comes in, they answer, they chat, no big deal. But then there are others who see that screen light up and suddenly their heart starts racing. The phone rings and they just stare at it like it's a threat. They let it go to voicemail, they text back instead. They'll avoid calling at all costs, even when a 2-minute conversation would solve everything. But here's the question: why? Why do some people genuinely hate phone calls? Is it just social anxiety? Is it laziness? Or is it something way deeper, something wired into their psychology, their past, maybe even their survival instincts? Stick with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might not just explain why you dread that ringing sound. It might explain your entire approach to communication, control, and vulnerability. Let's start with the first group, the ones who hate phone calls because of what phone calls have meant to them in the past. Imagine this: you're younger, maybe a teenager, and late one night the phone rings, your parent answers. You hear their voice change, something happened, someone's hurt, someone's gone, and from that moment on your brain makes a connection. Phone calls equal bad news, or maybe it wasn't that dramatic, maybe it was smaller but repeated. A parent who only called to yell, a partner who only reached out when they needed something, a boss who called after hours just to dump more work on you. Over and over, the phone became a symbol, not of connection, but of stress, of obligation, of something being wrong. Psychologists call this a conditioned emotional response. Your brain, trying to protect you, starts associating the sound, the act, the entire ritual of a phone call with danger or discomfort. And once that connection is made, it's really hard to break. Even if most of your calls now are harmless, even if it's just a friend checking in, your nervous system doesn't care, it remembers, and it reacts. So you avoid, you let it ring. You text instead because texting feels safe. Texting doesn't ambush you, it doesn't demand an immediate emotional reaction. You can pause, you can think, you can control the interaction. For this group, hating phone calls isn't about the call itself. It's about what the call represents. It's a protective mechanism. It's your brain saying, hey, we've been hurt this way before. Let's not do that again. Now let's talk about the second group, the ones who hate phone calls not because of the past, but because of what might happen right now in the present. This is where catastrophizing comes in. And if you've ever let a call go to voicemail and then spent the next 20 minutes imagining every possible reason they called, every terrible thing they might say, every awkward silence you might have to fill, yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Here's what happens in the mind of someone who catastrophizes phone calls. The phone rings, and instantly the brain just floods with questions. Why are they calling? What do they want? What if I say something stupid? What if I don't know the answer? What if there's this long, horrible pause and I don't know how to fill it? What if they're mad at me? What if I misunderstand them? What if they can hear that I'm anxious? It's not just fear. It's like a full internal simulation of failure, and here's the wild part. This is actually your brain trying to help you. It's trying to prepare you for every possible outcome so that you're not blindsided. It's trying to give you control in a situation that feels completely uncontrollable. Because that's the thing about phone calls, right? You can't prepare a script. You can't edit your response. You can't see the other person's face to read their emotions. You're just flying blind in real time with no escape route. And for people who crave control, who need to process before they respond, who feel safest when they can think things through, a phone call is the opposite of safe. It's exposure, it's vulnerability, it's being put on the spot, so they avoid it, not because they don't care about the person, but because the anxiety of the unknown, the fear of being caught off guard, feels more exhausting than just dealing with the consequences of not answering. And here's where it gets interesting. Some psychologists actually argue that this kind of anxiety isn't always a bad thing. Yes, it's uncomfortable, absolutely, but people who catastrophize, they're also often the most prepared. They've already thought through every outcome, they've already planned for failure, so when something does go wrong, they're not surprised, they're ready, which brings us to the third group, the ones who hate phone calls not out of fear or trauma, but out of pure strategy. These are the defensive pessimists. The people who have figured out that for them, phone calls just aren't efficient. They're not productive. They're simply not the best tool for communication. Think about it. A phone call demands your attention right now. It interrupts whatever flow you're in. It forces you to switch gears mentally and emotionally to match the pace and tone of someone else. And if you're someone who works best with time to think, with space to craft your words, with the ability to revisit and revise what you're saying, a phone call feels like a trap. For this group, it's not personal. It's not about the person calling, it's about the medium itself. They'd rather receive a voice note they can listen to twice. They'd rather get a text they can respond to when their brain is actually ready. They'd rather have an email with all the details laid out so they don't have to scramble to remember everything that was said in a 10-minute conversation. This is actually linked to something called asynchronous communication preference. Some people thrive in real-time, back-and-forth dialogue. Others thrive when they can control the timing, the rhythm, the flow of information. Neither is better. They're just different ways of being human. And for people in this third group, hating phone calls isn't about fear. It's about self-awareness. It's about knowing themselves well enough to recognize that they communicate better, think clearer, and feel more authentic when they're not performing on demand. So where does that leave us? Here's the psychological turn. Because yes, avoiding phone calls can absolutely be a sign of anxiety. It can be a trauma response. It can be a strategic choice. But it's also worth asking, what's the cost? Because here's the truth, people who hate phone calls often spend way more energy avoiding them than the actual call would have taken. They replay the missed call in their head. They stress about the voicemail. They over-explain in a long text about why they didn't answer. The avoidance itself becomes its own burden. But here's the other truth. These same people, the ones who dread the ring, who overthink every word, who need control and time and space, they're also often the most thoughtful communicators you'll ever meet. They're the ones who write those long, heartfelt messages. They're the ones who remember details because they actually had time to process what you said. They're the ones who won't say something just to fill the silence. When they finally speak, they mean it. And in a crisis, when things actually go wrong, these are often the people who stay the calmest because they've already imagined the worst-case scenario. They've already planned for it. They're not shocked. They're ready. So is it exhausting to be someone who hates phone calls? Yeah, absolutely. Does it make life harder sometimes? For sure. But does it also mean you're more careful, more intentional, more prepared than most people walking around out there? Often, yeah, it really does. Let's bring it all together. If you hate phone calls because of past experiences, because the sound of a ring brings back memories of bad news or stressful conversations, you're not broken. You're protecting yourself. Your brain learned a pattern and it's just trying to keep you safe. The challenge isn't forcing yourself to suddenly love phone calls. The challenge is recognizing when the past is controlling the present. Not every call is a threat. Not every ring means danger. Healing doesn't mean you have to become a phone person. It just means slowly teaching your nervous system that it's okay to be surprised sometimes, that not all surprises are bad. If you hate phone calls because of catastrophizing, because your mind races through every terrible possibility the second that screen lights up, you're not weak. You're not overreacting. You're just someone whose brain runs on preparation and control. The challenge is learning to trust yourself in the moment, to realize that even if you stumble, even if there's an awkward silence, even if you don't have the perfect answer ready, you'll survive it. You always have, and if you hate phone calls because they just don't fit the way you process information, because you work better with time and space and the ability to think before you speak, you're not antisocial. You're not cold. You're just wired differently. The challenge is communicating that to the people around you, letting them know, hey, I care about you, I just communicate better this way. And the people who truly matter, they'll understand. So here's the real question. Which one are you? Are you protecting yourself from a past that taught you phone calls meant pain? Are you trying to control an unpredictable interaction because your brain craves certainty? Or have you simply figured out that phone calls aren't your language and that's completely okay? Maybe you're a mix of all three. Maybe it depends on who's calling. Maybe it's changed over time as you've grown. But here's what actually matters. Understanding why you feel the way you feel doesn't mean you have to change. It just means you get to stop judging yourself for it. You get to stop thinking something's wrong with you because you'd rather text. You get to stop apologizing for needing time to think before you respond. Your communication style is part of your psychology, and your psychology is part of your story. So the next time your phone rings and your stomach tightens, the next time you send that call to voicemail and feel a little wave of guilt, remember this: you're not avoiding connection, you're protecting your peace, you're honoring your process, you're being intentional about how you let the world in. And that's not something to fix, that's something to understand. If this made you rethink the way you see phone calls, or maybe even the way you see yourself, you're going to love the other psychology topics we dig into here. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one, because we don't just talk about behavior, we talk about the why behind it, the kind of psychology that actually explains you. See you there.